Been I've been here.
On a second. All right.
And Jamie
Yeah, I've
decided
been
to show up. The family's here.
there was all kinds of little things going on in the last couple of months, but I think I'll be seeing you guys next week for sure.
It's 18 hours.
Good.
Live and in live and direct.
That's right.
I think the last time I saw you, we went to that place to eat hot dogs.
You know what? This is why I haven't seen you in a while because the last time I saw you, I got home way too late.
Blame it on me. I
You
followed
probably,
you and he blamed it on me.
yeah.
Not your fault. I like to have fun.
Oh, yeah. Jamie, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good, man. Nice to see you too.
There's light on. I figure out how to turn it off.
She's a clever. Use your AI. Let's go.
We got Firefly. Who's Fireflies?
That's Surya.
Uh,
Is that your
Don't take it.
Oh, okay.
no?
No.
We got Yen. We got Yen.
Yeah, coming in.
Yen is in Vietnam today. We're still in Vietnam.
Oh, nice.
What time is it in Vietnam? Yen, there she is.
There she is.
What time is it there, Yen?
All right, I got Stephen in the waiting room. We're gonna bring him in and get started. It's what,
Let's get
6:02?
started.
Oh man, it's 6:02. We're early. Woo!
Let's go.
I know, right? It's the first time.
Oh, there, yeah, our guest is joining us.
Yes, he is.
There he is, the man
There
of
he
the
is.
hour.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Steven, how you doing, Bell?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Wonderful.
Good.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You
Look
guys
at
don't.
Hugo. Look at Hugo. Like this guy's just like
Does that car have self-driving? Turned off his his video.
he's there in the video.
Yes, absolutely. It has self-driving. There's no other way to drive these days unless the car's driving you.
Love it.
Good to see you, brother.
Good to see you too, bro. I think I'll see you on the 28th, right?
Yep, next week.
Perfect.
Surya, are you flying in? Come meet us in person?
Yeah, of course, like if Donald Trump allows me, I'm sorry, but
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, we'll wait. Go ahead and get started because I know we have you have a lot to cover, Stephen. So once again, thanks everybody for joining us. Dropping Jules. I'm here with Edwin and everybody. I feel like it's a family or this every Tuesday thing. So thank you all. We got Surya from India and Bowie in Vietnam. Oh my gosh. We are just international here today again. So thank you all. Edwin, you want to say a few words? Few words.
Yeah. Like you said, this is turning to be a family affair. So this is great. This is awesome. So, guys, thank you for coming again, and again, Sherry with the time difference, Yen in Vietnam with a different time difference. You guys, thank you for being part of this. This is a true inspiration for people that don't know how we do it. You guys are a pure example how this gets done. So, thank you for being here.
you're welcome.
Welcome. And thank you, Stephen. We are super excited for round 2 of Morby Method. You can just give a quick recap and we'll dive into a case study. Super excited for that.
Absolutely. So, quick recap of what the Morby method is. Essentially, it is an acquisition strategy. So it's a way similar to buying property sub 2. It is a different tool in your toolbox on how to acquire real estate. The benefit of the Morby method and why people use it is to either eliminate or significantly reduce the cash required to purchase a piece of real estate. So, I had mentioned previously the Morby method is a combination of taking a first position loan, almost always a DSCR loan, and having the seller carry a second position, either as a promissory note, a recorded mortgage, or what most people are doing right now is a preferred equity position in the LLC. And so through those two quote unquote financing tools, you're getting X amount of funding for a property, and that either eliminates how much you have to bring down in terms of down payment and closing costs, or significantly reduces it from your typical 20% down DSCR or 30% down mortgages. And so the goal with this specific acquisition method, this specific acquisition strategy, is to allow you to scale quickly and buy more property using this method. And depending on the property itself, how you structure the Morby might allow you to get access to rehab funds easier and at a lower cost than you would if you were doing a fix and flip loan. And so before I jump into like the first case study, does anyone have any questions or just general information they want to throw out or talk about before I pull up some numbers? I'll take that as a no. So
that works.
Let's see if I can figure out how to share. All right, so I'm sharing a Word document. If I can get a thumbs up or a vocal yes, you could see it. That'd be great.
Yeah, we can.
We good.
Yes, you're going to.
Perfect. So this is a very vanilla case study. This is just a situation with using a DSCR loan and a seller second. And so the purchase price of this property is $500,000. So generally, if we were doing a DSCR loan, if anyone's familiar with DSCR loans, you'd have to bring at least 20% down, in some cases 15% down, to buy this property. Above and beyond that, you have to pay closing costs to close on the property. So you're looking at 20% of 500,000 is 100, plus your closing costs, roughly 3 to 4%. So you're bringing well over $120,000 to purchase this piece of real estate. And so after it starts cash flowing, your cash on cash return, not very sexy, but people do it all day, every day to buy real estate. And so in this case, this specific case study, the seller's home is free and clear. So they don't have a mortgage to pay off. They own a piece of real estate. It's worth $500,000. And so we're going to offer to give them 80% down if they're willing to seller carry 20%. And so that, in my opinion, is a little easier to convince a client that or a seller than it is to say, can you carry 80% or 90% and I only bring you 10 or 20% down? You're offering to put $400,000 in this seller's pocket day one. And so we use a DSCR loan to close. We're going to bring them $400,000 down the day of closing. The seller does agree to the 20%. And so with that situation, your buyer's cash to close is technically zero. Now, there is closing costs. Now, in this specific case study, the seller only agreed to carry 20%. And so in terms of total financing, the buyer is only financing 100% of the property's value, 80 in the DSCR, 20 from the seller. The buyer has to bring their own closing costs. Now, ultimately, any buyer in a similar situation can borrow these funds from a Gator, can borrow funds from a transactional lender if they have a way of paying it back quickly. They can borrow funds or raise capital with friends and business partners to be able to bring those closing costs to even greater reduce their closing costs. But in this case, the closing costs are estimated at $10,000 for this closing. So effectively, this person is able to buy this piece of real estate for $10,000 out of pocket. So now that's obviously significantly less than 15 or 20% down plus closing costs on your standard DSCR. So the way the structure works is we bring in the DSCR loan for $400,000 in first position. The seller had already agreed to bring in to finance the $100,000. So this seller did 6% interest for 5 years. So I had mentioned in the previous podcast that part of your underwriting is to analyze your exit strategy. You need to be prepared that in 5 years from now, you owe the seller that $100,000 in full. That is your balloon. So many of you are sub 2 students. So just like in sub 2, when the sellers carry a seller carry portion, there is a balloon period in which you've committed to pay them back X dollars amount. In this case, the seller is going to receive 6% interest. You sell them on the passive income. You sell them on being able to defer capital gains. And so you have to underwrite your exit strategy 5 years from now. Will this property appraise and or appreciate sufficiently? Will you have paid down sufficient amount of the mortgage? And will you yourself qualify for the refi in that moment? So now I had mentioned the buyer's bringing their own closing costs. So they bring their $10,000 down. Now, as part of the closing, when you close on the DSCR loan, my buyer does need to bring the 20% down on their own. On the HUD, we cannot include the seller's carry at closing. And so you do need to, if you don't have the $100,000 personally, whether it be your own retirement accounts, savings accounts, checking, wherever you have the funds, you do then need to arrange for transactional funding. And so the transactional funder, in this case, brought the $100,000 on behalf of the buyer. Those funds were structured in a way where they were sent to title from the buyer's bank account. The DSCR lender, in this case, did not source or season funds, which is very important. So, understanding how this works is part one. Part two is making sure that all of the third parties involved, in this case, the lender and transactional funder and seller, that everybody knows how the money is going to move to closing is super, super important, because these funds, while the lender doesn't source or season them, there is a specific way they need to make it to title for those funds to be able to be used to close. And so in this case, the transactional funder brings the funds get deposited into the borrower's bank account, which then immediately gets sent to title within the same moment. The funds sit in the borrower's account for less than a minute. The funds get verified that they were in the borrower's account prior to closing and then wired to title. Now, in this case, so now the question is, how does the transactional funder get their money back? So at closing, the DSCR lender funds $400,000 to the title company. Closing costs are 10 grand that the buyer needs to bring. They need to bring that to close. So now the total sale price is 500. So our math needs to work out to $500,000 at title to close. So if the lender wired 400 and the closing costs are 10, so that's the closing cost the buyer needs to bring. The transaction, and I actually didn't include the transactional funder here because this is the seller note, because the seller does carry the 100, but the transactional funder is actually the one bringing it to closing. And this. So the transactional funder is actually the one bringing the 100 grand to closing. Now, the seller at closing, after they carry the $100,000, their net to their pocket is the 400,000. So their gross receipt is the 500,000 sale price minus their closing costs, which will be some title fees, taxes, and a few small line items. And I do have a HUD to share with you guys after this case study. In this case, the seller carries the 100. That 100,000 that they're carrying is what's used to pay back the transactional funder. Now, there are going to be fees associated with that transactional funding. That funding will be highly dependent on who's lending you the money and how that we structure that loan, but it can range anywhere from 2 to 5% depending on the risk, the transaction, and your transactional funder. So the seller is the one that essentially reimburses the transactional funder that 100 grand. And how is that done? It's done through specific escrow instructions that are executed prior to closing and are provided to the title or settlement agent, because then they'll know how the funds need to be dispersed at the time of closing. So the seller walks away with their 400 in cash. Now they sold the house for 500. So for their total balance, for them to be completely made whole, it's 400 in cash with $100,000 note that gets executed. And essentially the buyer acquires this property for $10,000 out of pocket, and the seller gets to earn their $6,000 a year in interest on their carryback. And then 5 years from this closing, the buyer of this property will refi or sell the property. Again, part of your due diligence when you're considering a Morby Method deal is what is the value you gain from buying this property at effectively 100% LTV? Is it cash flow. If you're prioritizing cash flow for 5 years, are you going to sell the property and ideally break even or take a small win? Or are you expecting the property to appreciate sufficiently to be able to refi out and eliminate that $100,000 note or sell the property? And so with this case study, it still costs the buyer money to buy this property. They still have to come out of pocket. However, this is significantly less than bringing 20% plus closing costs. Before I move on to the HUD, because the HUD is going to be the actual transaction that closed a couple of weeks ago. It was in Arizona, single family residence. Does anybody have any questions about this specific case study?
I have a quick question.
Shoot.
So in this case, I know the buyer brought the 10,000. Can that also be something that's funded by the transactional lender?
It can be, absolutely. So, but the question will be, how does the transactional lender get paid back? So for the transactional funder to get paid back through this transaction,
Escrow,
we would
okay.
need the seller to carry a larger position. So what we could do here is real quick is just modify the numbers a bit,
Mm-hmm.
call it seller carryback of 30%, which works.
Albert, may inuubo dyan.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
It's 400,000 times
So
5%.
we've at a seller
20.
carryback of 30%, it's 150. So now we're still going to do an 80 LTV loan.
Okay.
Buyer is still going to get the 400%. Seller agrees to finance 150
Mm-hmm.
for the 5 years. Buyer's closing costs are 10%. Transactional funder still going to bring 100 grand to close. Now, in this case, we can have the transactional funder bring 110 to close. So now that's my down payment and the $10,000 in closing costs. Still 400, closing costs are 10. Seller's going to receive 350 at closing because now they're going to carry 150. Transactional funder brings 110. The seller note is now 150. So now the seller walks away with 350 in cash.
Mm-hmm.
Plus the $100,000 note. Is that right?
110 note? Wait, one.
No, because the seller's still only carrying the $100,000 note.
I thought it was 150. No.
Sorry, 150 note. This is still 400 cash. No, sorry guys, kind of working on the fly here. Restructuring.
350. You're correct. 350 in cash. Yep.
Buyer acquires the property for 0.
Mm-hmm.
Seller doesn't. Let's forget the interest carryback for a moment.
Negative 40.
Now with the $150,000 note, buyer walks away with
40.
Yep, 40 grand minus transactional fees.
Okay.
So if the 150,000 and the transactional fees are, let's call it 2.5%, it's going to cost them 4 grand to borrow the transactional funds for the 24 to 48 hours. So the buyer does now in this specific case now walk away with just under $40,000 on this transaction.
Nice.
At that point, yes, the transactional funder is bringing the down payment plus the closing costs. In one of the transactions we closed recently, we actually had the transactional funder bring in close to $200,000, and that included some reserves that we needed the buyer to meet for the loan, and that just got refunded as part of the closing. And so in this specific case study, originally it was written to be a significant reduction in the total capital required to close. But in the one I'm going to show you, it's a situation like this, actually significantly more. The seller actually carried 70% of the sale price at closing, and we did a 75% LTV loan. So that was very highly leveraged, but the borrower had big plans for the funds in terms of rehab budget on the property and what they were going to do to moving forward.
Is the promissory note back to the second position?
So in this case, or for example, this case study, the promissory note can be recorded as a second mortgage, and that would be done after closing. So again, on our HUD, we can't show a second position lien. We can't show any subordinate financing, but we can close and then do a subsequent transaction with the seller writing a mortgage that gets signed at closing and does get recorded. But what many Morby method deals that are being funded right now, they're being underwritten and signed in terms of the letter of intent to the seller with a preferred equity position in the underlying LLC that's buying the property. So no note gets recorded, no mortgage gets signed. The seller agrees and gets an equity participation in the LLC.
Yeah, that sounds kind of similar to what they do in equity rollovers in the business world, where someone comes in with like SBA funding to buy a, 70% cash to close, and then the seller ends up with 30% equity in the new entity that owns and operates the business.
So I can't speak to that, but that does sound very, very similar, right?
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with that world, but yes, that sounds almost exactly the way it's being set up. When we close, the seller gets an equity position in the LLC. They own that percentage, and that's the percentage that's used to pay them back and cover the down payment and closing costs. So now I'm going to pull up.
Just a quick question.
Yeah, shoot.
Stephen, can we use business line of credit to pay for transactional funding?
So however you want to pay the transactional funding is perfectly fine. Ultimately, that would be negotiated between you and your transactional funder, meaning I can only assume that any transactional funder that's about to put up 10, 15, 20% of the sale price for the closing, that you and them will have agreements written on how they expect to get paid back and what collateral they need to do so. And so on previous transactions, we've had the transactional funder require that the seller sign specific escrow instructions and disbursement instructions that are then provided to the settlement company so that they can ensure at the time of closing that they get reimbursed the funds that they expect to be reimbursed, and that typically includes the fees that they're owed. And so whatever that percentage is, whatever those fees are, if you want to take a business line of credit and pay the transactional funder that way, it's perfectly fine, as long as all of those moving parts are figured out ahead of time, right? So that no one at closing is asking how they're getting paid or how funds are being accepted. So all of those things need to be sorted out, weeks before closing so that everyone's on the same page.
Makes sense.
Wes, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so kind of going back to the seller having, an equity stake within the, the LLC. Are they just having an equity position, or in the operating agreement, are you setting something up of like, oh, their equity payment is going to be X amount per month or a percentage of the cash flow? Like, how is that kind of like structured and handled, right? Because it's like, okay, well, if they're 30% equity, am I paying them 30% of net cash flow every month? And then when I refinance, or is it like set up in the operating agreement, like, hey, they have $150,000 equity stake, and I'm buying that equity back by providing a monthly payment that's a set amount and over X amount of time, and yada, yada, yada.
So the latter. So exactly that. So in the operating agreement, it dictates that their equity position is being paid back at X percent, either fixed payment, percentage, and over what period of time. So, kind of like a mortgage. In the case study, it was the 6% interest only for 5 years. So they were going to get 6% of the 100 grand, which works out to the $6,000 a year over the course of the next 5 years. And then they need to be paid back their 100,000 in full. So the operating agreement dictates that, and that's all they're entitled to. So I haven't seen a single Morby method transaction that was underwritten where the seller gets a percentage of revenue generated and equity, where if the property sells, it's strictly whatever their dollar amount is equal to whatever their percentage of payment is, whether it's a fixed number or based on an interest rate.
Okay, so you would essentially underwrite it of saying like, hey, you're carrying $150,000 at a 5% rate on a 30-year amortized loan, we'll say, and so your payment every month is X. And so you're an equity partner, and your equity payment as an equity partner for every month is X until this amount is paid in full, in which point you have essentially sold your equity back. You have essentially sold your equity to the majority
That's
owner.
exactly right. That's 100% exactly how it's done.
I'm a master at this. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to go. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to have a lot of questions, and I'm actually glad I found this because I have my first Morby Method deal that I'm working on right now, and I've got like a million questions. So
Right. I mean, ultimately, however you decide to structure and whatever, I guess that's all where creative finance comes into play. However creative you want to get, you can get. And so if instead of offering them a specific interest rate over a period of time, you want to offer them actual equity in the property, like an equity share agreement where they get a cut of the property at the time of sale in 5, 7, or 10 years from now, you have every right to do that. It's all about what the value is for you to do that. Are they going to defer payments for the 5, 7, or 10-year period if they're going to be able to share in the appreciation? What can you gain if you made that kind of offer? Or do you want to keep it simple and just say, hey, I'm going to pay you X dollars a month, and then on this specified date, I'll pay you off with a balloon amount. However you want to structure it, you can do that. But the majority that I've seen, if not all of them, have all been structured like a second mortgage. They just happen to be a preferred equity position in the LLC as opposed to actually recording a mortgage to avoid having to go through a second closing at title and worrying about any kind of subordinate financing from the first position.
Yeah, no, and I mean that absolutely makes sense. I've just never heard anybody like explain it. Yes, this is how you do it,
right?
And do it properly, because I know first positions are going to have issues with that second position potentially. And I know that's why some TCs won't touch them because they're like, that's bordering on mortgage fraud. I'm like, then why not just make them a equity partner in the holding LLC? But I've never heard anybody actually talk through that. So thank you for doing it. You have validated my existence today, and I feel great.
Absolutely. No problem at all. And I'll say actually the first Morby method that I ever did originate was with an actual second position. There was a second title company. So we did one closing at one title company. The second title company closed the mortgage the second day. There were escrow instructions to move seller proceeds from the first title company to the second title company. And the mortgage did get recorded. The buyer still owns that property today. They operated it as a pad split in South Carolina. And, ultimately, you had mentioned it bordering on mortgage fraud, but our closing, the borrowers brought the funds to close. We met all of the lender's guidelines to get that closing to happen. There was no subordinate financing at the moment we closed. The following day, the seller wrote them a mortgage. They agreed to it. And then there was an exchange of funds then. And so for all intents and purposes, our transaction was perfectly fine. And then they did a secondary transaction after that. So, most lenders, their hesitation to allow secondary or subordinate financing is at the time of closing because they want to see that the borrower has skin in the game. But there's no lender I don't know any lenders that do not allow a second mortgage behind their mortgage because at that point, they don't care. They're in first position. And at the time of closing,
I know they don't like it.
they don't like it, but it doesn't impact their first position, right? So as long as it doesn't supersede their lien, and it shouldn't, because they would have to sign off for any lien to supersede their lien. There's nothing they can do about it. There's nothing in the mortgage that you sign on a DSCR that says you can't go and get a second lien. I can get a private loan from anyone in this group right now against any piece of real estate that I own. Yeah. And if they're comfortable writing me a second lien at 85 LTC, 95 LTC, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing stopping any of my mortgage documents don't stop me from doing that. It's just the timing of it. The lenders want to see skin in the game at the time of closing.
Yeah.
I kind of explain it to some people who were, it's kind of like, it's like getting you're buying a piece of property, but then you go and get a HELOC right after that, right?
Yep.
So that's like a second lien, and I don't need to go to my mortgage company and say, hey, I just bought this property, but can I go and get a HELOC on this? I don't need their permission to do it. It's my property. I own it now. And so I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think kind of in my mind, if I was going to sell one of my properties on a Morby method, I would feel more secure being an equity partner within that LLC and having performance clauses, in a solid operating agreement, JV agreement,
Yeah, and that
whatever.
just protects you, right? Just protects your interest.
A lot
Correct.
better than just being in a second position where if something
Yeah.
goes wrong, then I'm not protected
Yeah.
in any way.
Which is absolutely part of the pitch. And so
Yeah.
whenever any of these wholesalers or people that are acquiring these deals, that's their pitch because it's absolutely true. And while second position might seem favorable because it's a recorded mortgage, at any point, if the underlying borrower defaults and the property has to go to foreclosure, then when it sells at auction, it's not going to sell at 100% of the market value. It's going to sell at 70 to 80% at best, meaning any second position lien gets wiped out and they don't get anything. Whereas getting preferred equity position in the LLC, there is performance clauses and there is protections in place to make sure that they get repaid back. And I would argue that those are better than the second position lien.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
absolutely. I would argue that too. Do you have a lender who's doing 80% LTV DSCRs right now? Because that would be fantastic.
I do. I am the lender doing 80% DSCR.
Okay,
right.
Perfect. I'll reach out.
His info's in the chat, Wes. I just dropped it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Julie. So now let me bring up, and I'm going to show you an actual HUD, and you guys can look up the address. So you can see that this deal closed. Let's see, where is this? Here we go. So here is my most recent Morby closing. It is 821 West Saguaro Lane.
Are you able to zoom in a little bit more?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So Magnus Title in Arizona has helped us out. So if anyone has any Morbys in Arizona, we were able to work this out with Magnus Title. Shout out to them. This is seller side and buyer side. If anyone hasn't seen what this closing statement looks like. Sale price of this property was $475. Now, these are all the closing costs and fees associated with getting a mortgage. You've got your settlement charges, impounds, loan charges, taxes. The borrower put $47.50 in escrow. In this specific instance, the way this title company structured it is they called the seller carry a holdback fee. They did that because this is part of the escrow instructions on how funds need to be dispersed. So the seller, in this case, carried $332,500. That $332,500, the math works out to 70% of the sale price. So this property was acquired, the letter of intent was executed, and the purchase contract was signed with the seller receiving 30% of the sale price at closing. So using $475 as the sale price, 30% is $142,500. So you'll see here, due to seller, $140,488 and 25 cents. So they took and received their 30% that they agreed to receive, and then the difference was carried, the 70%, $332,500. So now on this specific deal, the sale price was $475. However, the property only appraised for $415. So keep that in mind when looking at this loan amount of $311,250. Our actual loan amount on the appraised value of this property was $311,250, which was 75% of the $415 appraised value. So bear in mind that, like any other mortgage loan, the value or the loan amount and LTV we offer is always going to be based on the appraised value or the lesser of the appraised versus the sale price. And so $311,250 is our loan amount, 75% of the $415. The buyer still bought this property at $475 because there was a large seller carry, which was going to allow them to still net funds at closing. The seller still got their sale price of $475, even though the property per the appraiser wasn't worth it. But in this case, this buyer's intent was to take the funds, reinvest into the property, convert this property to a pad split. They're going to see a higher return on this property, and in their mind was perfectly fine, quote unquote, overpaying for this property, even though it didn't appraise for the $475. So In this case, 177 is what the buyer needed to bring the day of closing. That 177 is the 25% down plus closing costs. So Wes had asked about 80% DSCR. We could have done this as an 80% DSCR, except on the appraisal, the rents on the long-term market schedule came back, and those rents were low. And because those rents were low, it didn't suffice to cover the debt service ratio required to get 80% DSCR on the purchase. So we had to go 25% down. The seller was carrying sufficient equity for us to be able to do 25% down. The math still worked out in terms of the buyer's due diligence. So they brought 177.23 to close. My seller received 140.488, and the math works out to the 475 purchase price. This buyer used a transactional funder for the down payment and the closing costs. And so, as I mentioned before, we did the transactional funds exactly like the first case study. Funds were deposited into an entity in one of the borrower's accounts, which were then immediately wired to title. We verified the funds did touch the borrower's account, at least for a moment. We don't source or season large deposits, which allowed us to let those funds sit in the borrower's account for quite literally a minute before they were transferred to title. And let's see, there's really not much else to show on this HUD other than you guys can see that it's a real closing. You guys look it up and you'll see you can call the escrow officer, Brittany, that helped us. You can ask Tactical TC, who was the TC on the transaction, who helped out with the deal. This was a Morby. The seller carried 70 and we offered 75 LTV for an effective 145% LTV purchase loan. So this carry amount of 332, those funds were used to pay back the transactional funder. So they used that to pay back 177. 177. So that leaves 155,477 after transactional funding fees, and let's round that to $5,000 in transactional fees. My borrower netted 150 grand at closing when purchasing this property.
Stephen, huge favor. Can you work the numbers again, starting from the 415 and how the buyer had to bring 177? So I know it was 25% off the 415, but where's the rest coming from? If you need a whiteboard.
Yeah.
Or if anybody else has any questions, just to break it down a little bit and, showing how they took back. So the seller carried back what, 75% or 70% on this one?
So I'm gonna do it on a Word document, although I probably should do it on Excel. But let's see.
And guys, jump in because there's no stupid question.
So, Stephen, did on this particular case for this property, did the seller own the property free and clear?
They did. So
Okay, so that's the reason why you had a big, large seller carryback.
correct. Because now on that closing statement, you would have seen a payoff should the seller have had a mortgage.
Yeah, that was what I was looking for. I was looking, I said, okay, did he have a loan to pay off, or is this 100% owner finance all the way through?
Correct. So because there was no loan, they were able to negotiate such a large seller carry position because the seller didn't have to pay anything off. Now, if they did,
and that's key, right? That's key because in order for the Morby to work correctly, you want to have properties that has a substantial amount of equity or free and clear. The best case scenario.
correct. Now, you can always structure the deal with the seller with a mortgage, just the seller's proceeds are going to be significantly reduced, and or the amount of seller carry you're going to get is also significantly going to be reduced. So this deal only worked to carry 70% from the seller because there was no mortgage to be paid. The seller was still able to walk away with a substantial amount of money, and which is why they were comfortable carrying such a large portion. DSCR loan, purchase price, appraised value. So seller carry is 70% of sale price And sorry, guys, this isn't as pretty as the other case study, but this will have all the numbers on here correctly. So 475, carrying 70%, 332, 500.
Mhm.
So starting here, my buyer needs to bring 25% of the appraised value plus the difference between 475 and 415, because this buyer agreed to still pay 475 even though the home appraised for 415. So my DSCR loan of 311,250 is going to be 75% of this 415. So step one is, what is 25% of 415? And that is 103,750. So
Stephen, before you continue, let me just ask this question in there. We know that the value of the home is going to be 415, but the buyer decided he wanted to pay the 475. Does that affect the DSCR itself, the loan itself, given the fact that you're only going to lend on the appraised value?
the only thing it impacts, the only thing it affects is that we're going to have to verify that the borrower brings the difference in funds. So
The 415 to the 475.
correct. And otherwise, the only other thing we asked was a letter of explanation on why the buyer was willing to overpay for a property that appraised at 415, which in this case, the buyer explained that he had strong projections for this property, strong projections for the market in the coming years, expected the property to appreciate, and also wanted to buy the property for his portfolio to assist with his taxes, right? So there's many reasons to buy real estate. And so, ultimately the underwriter just wanted something for their file. It doesn't impact the file other than a larger down payment requirement to make sure that all the numbers match up. And
Gotcha.
so if it wasn't for the 475 purchase price and 415 value, our closing costs would have been our loan would have been 103 plus closing costs, and the and the transactional funder would have brought much less. But because we needed to bridge the difference between 475 and 415, we needed to bring an additional 60 grand at closing. So the difference, sale price, and appraisal, 60,000. So that math works out to 163 total, and then plus closing costs is why you guys saw the total being 177 in terms of total closing. So total closing costs and down payment, 177. So now that from that 170, that was what the transactional funder brought. Down payment, closing costs, plus the difference between 475 and 415. Seller carried 70% of the sale price, 332,500. So the transactional funder was paid back from this 332,500. 332,500 minus the 177. That math works out to the seller's net proceeds. Seller net proceeds at closing, 155,500. Seller carry. Well, I think I already have the seller carry, 332,500. And so that is what breaks down the numbers you saw on the settlement statement, why the seller got 155. There was no mortgage to be paid off. If the seller had to pay off a mortgage, then these numbers would change significantly. The seller would not be able to carry 70% if they had a mortgage for 50% of the property's value. Does that make sense? Is there any questions about this?
No, very helpful. Question for you. How was the operating agreement structured for the seller? Like what were they looking for as far as payback? Was it a balloon, or what did that look like?
So on this one, I actually didn't get a copy of that operating agreement.
Okay.
And so from the lender's perspective, I do not necessarily need to involve myself with that part of the due diligence. right? So once the clients come to me and they know they're doing a Morby, how they plan on paying back to the seller, what percent and what the monthly payment is, doesn't impact any of my underwriting. It doesn't impact the DSCR loan. The only thing it impacts is the buyer on whether the deal still makes sense for them to move forward, right?
Okay.
So if the seller wants too high of an interest rate, if the seller's request for payments offsets any benefit in terms of monthly cash flow for carrying the property, the buyer wouldn't be buying it. Now, I don't know what the final terms were for this specific property, because again, it doesn't impact my underwriting. So my diligence is strictly, do we meet the DSCR ratio on my first lien? And can we verify and validate the funds? Does my borrower qualify for the DSCR? So I don't know the specific terms, but I do know it was preferred equity, meaning there was no recorded second mortgage. We did not have to work with a second title company to record that second lien. I know for a fact we did a preferred equity position because we didn't have to worry about moving the funds from title's account.
Thank you, Stephen.
No problem. So does anyone have any questions? Does anyone potentially have a property they think might work for a Morby? Maybe a seller they've been talking to who's been asking for a large down payment. Something we can look at. We can pre-underwrite the deal.
Wes has one. I know
I've
Jenny
got
was
one.
going to bring one from last week, but she's not here. So let's go, Wes. Thanks for being here.
Let's do it. Okay. Where do you want me to start?
So you have a seller in mind, a property in mind?
Yeah, so I've got a property in mind. It was realtor contact of mine reached out to me about it a few days ago. It's a duplex in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The backstory with the seller is if she believes what they did was they purchased a portfolio in the area a few years ago. They got commercial lending on it. That balloon is coming due on the commercial lending. And so they're looking at the portfolio going, hey, we probably need to sell a couple of these, and then hold on to the rest. And this just happens to be one of the ones that they're looking to sell. So it is on the market. My partner Adam and I are considering trying to do a Morby method on it and then maybe giving co-living a shot in Chattanooga. But it should still work even as a long-term rental if we just hold it like that. We just have to figure out how to make it work, and we haven't had a chance to do that yet.
So what is let's just say, what do they have it listed at?
So they have it listed for $275,000.
Okay. And do you know how much they owe on it?
So that's the thing, we don't know because technically it's on that portfolio loan. So when I look it up in PropStream, it doesn't have any mortgage information, and the amount that it says they paid for it looks like they
It's a
bought
large
multiple
amount
properties at the same
right.
time. Yeah. So
Got it.
I have been discussing a 70-30 Morby method with the realtor when we first spoke about it, or some other sort of creative finance deal. Morby method probably working the best because it seems like they're trying to get as much out of it, upfront as they can. So we were talking about a 70-30 Morby method. So, first position financing, trying to get them 70% of that 275 at closing, and then they carry the rest.
So first position 70, seller carry 30. So if we did a first position at 70%, 192,500. So DSCR 192,500. As long as the seller, their mortgage is less than the 192,500, then this could work as a Morby in terms of, if they just want to eliminate that mortgage, you could do so without knowing exactly how much they owe. We can't necessarily do that math and run the calculation.
Yeah.
But, on the surface, any property can work as a Morby. The question is whether the numbers work for the buyer as a Morby.
Yeah,
If the
absolutely.
if the seller's carry position, if they want 12% on that 30%, then that could completely throw off your numbers as a short term. It could impact your numbers as a pad split. And at that point, is it even worth it? The DSCR at 70% on a duplex, you're looking, sub 7% interest rates. So I don't know what numbers you're using for your due diligence, but at 70 LTV,
I think the analysis I did on it, I looked at it at 7%. We're going through a refinance right now on another property, and we're sub 7% on that. It is 70% LTV.
Yeah.
So
yeah, at 70, sub 7 is super easy. So in terms of your cash flow or what the cost is going to be there, that's great. It's really just negotiating the seller carry. We can do a hypothetical. What happens if the seller owes, 150 grand? That math really just works out to the seller getting to net 42,500, and then carrying the 30%. So now, unless you wanted to have them cover your closing costs and down payment, you could consider 80% first position, 30% seller carry. So now our DSCR jumps up to 220. And then again, depending on what the seller owes will dictate what their net is. But if you go with a 80-30, you would be able to effectively buy this property without any money out of your own pocket. You would just have to be comfortable with leveraging yourself at 110% on a piece of real estate.
I've made worse decisions in my life. Yeah, especially because both, I would say, the market rate and the Section 8 for 2 bedrooms there is 13. They're both 2-bed, 1-baths. So market in Section 8, we're looking at about 1,300 per unit. So we're almost hitting, the 1% rule just on what their current asking price is.
Right.
So I just have to figure out what that PITI and then that payment to the seller is going to look like. Yeah, ideally, if I could do this and pocket, say, 15K at closing on top of it. And I mean, and I wouldn't need a transactional lender. I've got the funds. I could do the transactional part of it myself. Yeah, I'd love to do it.
The thing is, if you bought with 80% and did a 30% seller carry, effectively that leaves 10% left over for closing costs. And in this case, there wouldn't be transactional funds you have to worry about. So 10% is 27 grand. Of that 27 grand, if we did 220 loan amount at closing costs of 4%. So on the 27, you'd be able to pocket just over $16,000 or $17,000 if you did it with an 80% first position and the seller agrees to carry 30%.
Okay. But that's, of course, the property actually appraises.
Correct, right? If the property appraises for less, then you would then have to either renegotiate with the seller to bring their purchase price down, or you'd have to consider doing what that client of mine did, which was decided to still buy the property because their overall underwriting allowed them to do that and continue to move forward with their pad split intent.
Okay. Yeah, I'll reach out to you later tonight or maybe tomorrow, and maybe we could take a little bit deeper look at this and see if it's something we can move forward on.
Yeah. So one thing to consider, and a lot of people don't know this, is when you buy a property in a portfolio, so it sounds like this person did, is that when you go to sell a property in a portfolio loan, you have to do what's called a carve out to be able to sell it. Meaning, if they took 80% LTV financing on their portfolio, they bought 5 pieces of real estate at 80% total LTV, they theoretically have 80% of their total loan balance allocated to each property. However, most portfolio lenders, for you to be able to sell one property from the portfolio, will require you to carve out 120% or 130% of the allocated loan balance per property, which may make this difficult because the seller may not have sufficient equity because of that carve out requirement to be able to carry that 30%.
Right.
So that's something the realtor may not be aware of, and it's something the buyer might not even be, I'm sorry, the seller might not be aware of, that
Yeah.
they have that carve out restriction. And so I would definitely have
So
urged.
we need to get more fidelity on that.
Correct. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I would, if the realtor doesn't know that that is a possibility, which again, if they haven't dealt with a portfolio transaction, they wouldn't know it. It's very possible the buyer, unless they're a sophisticated investor, they could have bought it as a portfolio product without even knowing to ask the question about what the carve out looks like at the time of sale or refi. And so
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
definitely your biggest hurdle, in my opinion, is have the buyer ask, have the seller ask for a payoff or to pull up their mortgage documents from when they closed to see what the carve out would be for them to sell a property individually.
Right.
So, Steve,
Yeah, shoot.
let me pick your brain, brother. You know, every time we get together, we're constantly trying to pick brains and figure things out, right? So,
Absolutely.
I've got a young lady here, Sonia. We've been kind of brainstorming over a property that we have here in Dania, and we're trying to figure out how to get this property. If I give you some numbers, can you just kind of brainstorm it and see what you come up with?
Shoot.
They're asking 1.8. It's an 8-door property. No mortgage, just they only write out. He's wanting 30% down. Can we structure a Morby method with something like that? The
Absolutely.
exit, the exit strategy to this is right now is currently livable as a multifamily, obviously, but the idea is to structure it as a sober home living.
That's perfect. So right now, is it operating as a multifamily or is it vacant?
Yes, they're on a month-to-month lease. All of them, all 8 units, on month-to-month lease. So we don't have to renew them. We just could give 90-day notice, if you will. Property been sold and new owners are taking over. We're not going to renew the lease, so give
What's
them
it gonna what's it gonna cost you to convert it to sober living?
per unit. We're looking at about 10 anywhere. If I had to guess, just me guessing, I'm going to say about 10 on the comfortable side.
10,000 per unit? You said 10,000 per unit?
Yes.
Okay. And the seller only wants 30% down. They're willing to carry 70%.
Yes.
Okay. So we can do this at a 50 LTV DSCR purchase. So now 900,000 DSCR loan. At 900,000 DSCR, which is 50% LTV, to give 30% to the seller, we have to give 540 to the seller.
Right.
From that 900,000 DSCR loan, the seller is going to carry the difference. So
Right.
now 900 minus the 540, that leaves $360,000 in excess proceeds. That 360 will be used to pay back the transactional funder. That'll bring the difference between our the 900,000, so the 50 LTV.
Can you do me a favor, Steve, before you continue? Just explain what excess proceeds is, just for people here to understand what that, when you say we're gonna, these 360K.
So sure. So if we do a $900,000 DSCR loan, the lender's gonna put up 900, and we're gonna have a transactional funder put up the other 900 to equal a total $1.8 million asking. Now, at closing, from that 1.8 million net to seller, technically, 900 is going to be used to pay back the transactional funder. So now that leaves $900,000 from the DSCR loan proceeds. Now, the seller's asking for 30% down. 30% down is 540. So the difference between the $900,000 DSCR loan and the $540 the seller is taking leaves $360,000 in excess proceeds. So those $360,000 in proceeds is net to buyer. Now, those are rough numbers because it's 360 in proceeds net to buyer, but we have to back out transactional fees and closing costs. So $900,000 loan, we'll use a 4% total closing costs. That's 36,000. So on 36, that leaves 324. So you would be able to walk away with 324. That gives you more than the $80,000 you need. 50 LTV loan means you're going to get an incredibly low interest rate as opposed to doing an 80 LTV loan. And in this case, you're leveraging yourself 50 LTV DSCR and 70 LTV seller carry for 120% LTV loan. Now, if you don't want to leverage yourself at 120%, we can just reduce this from a 50% LTV loan to a 40% LTV loan. And so effectively, we can do the math to where you're getting, if at minimum you want that 80,000, you would take the minimum required to get 80,000 at closing to cover $36,000 in closing costs and transactional fees, and you would be leveraged at 108%, 110% versus 120. So effectively, it's up to you to dictate how much you want to leverage yourself. Ultimately, the seller is protected because the seller carry position, that 70% that they're carrying, ideally, I would argue that you should offer them the preferred equity position in the LLC. But if you want to do it as a second position mortgage, you can do so. But ultimately, the question is how the seller wants to carry that mortgage, how they want to carry that equity position, and how much leverage you want to get on that piece of real estate. But given that it's free and clear, you have all the flexibility to borrow 40%, 50%, up to 70 or 75% on the 1.8 million. It's whether you want to leverage yourself at that level.
Gotcha. And then my last question to that was going to be, you hear a lot of people ask the same, or not ask the same question, but constantly keep saying, well, if he wants 30, we can give him 40, 50. I think we had this conversation on the last time we were here. We don't need to give him 30. We can actually offer him 40 or 50% down payment on this type of method.
Correct. Because, we could theoretically, let's say we approve this loan up to 70 LTV. You could offer the seller 50% in terms of their down payment, take a 70% LTV DSCR loan. You're still going to be at the same 120 in terms of total leverage that you're borrowing. But by telling the seller, instead of bringing 30% down, I'm going to bring you 50% down. Now on the seller carry terms, because I'm bringing you so much more money the day of closing, instead of doing a 5 or 6% interest rate, I want you to offer me 2.5%. I want you to do a 0% interest. I want to pay you principal only if I bring you $900,000 to your pocket. Instead of you netting 540, I'll make sure you net 900 at closing. But now I want 0% interest, or I want 1.5% interest. So that way you can limit the interest you pay.
Right.
So given the property is free and clear, absolutely, you can structure this as a Morby. It's really just what leverage you want to take on as the buyer, sponsor, personal guarantor.
Awesome. Stephen, thank you, brother.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? Anyone have a property they think might fit a Morby? Any other questions?
A lot of useful information.
2010.
Sorry,
do you have a 70-20-10 loan that you offer?
I do not. No. So the loans that I have available are going to be on DSCR. It's going to be up to 85% LTV. And the requirements to get to 85 are very difficult. So I would tell you the majority of clients are qualifying at 80. Otherwise, any other creative finance that we've talked about is going to require a seller second position. And so, the loans that I give are essentially just the first position lien, the DSCR, the first mortgage, whether it be DSCR, bank statement, P&L. But no, I don't have like an all-in-one product that's 80-10-10 or 80-15-5 or anything like that.
I'm doing one now, and it's 70% DSCR, 20% owner finance, 10% at the table.
Got it. So yeah, that's a lender I have access to, and I can offer that loan. However, if the seller's willing to carry any part of the mortgage, it's usually better to do a Morby method with a regular DSCR. The lender that offers that program, there's only one that I know of in the market. The rate starts at 8.365 or 8.375 for a DSCR at 70 LTV, whereas at 70 LTV with any score above 680 or 700 puts us well below 7.5 for the same loan. And we just put the seller, either we record the seller position after closing or we do the preferred equity.
That's awesome, Stephen. Thank you.
No problem.
Bert, I feel like you have a question.
Oh boy, Bert.
You're muted.
Brother, you're still muted, brother.
There we go. Good evening, everyone. Hey, Stephen, welcome back, buddy. Sorry I got here late.
Hey, no worries, Bert.
I have a pending phone call with you. I'll probably give you a call sometime tomorrow, but it's a pending phone call with somebody else that I'm doing somewhat of a Morby method with. And your name was brought up, and I said, yeah, I know who he is. So let's give him a call. So we're going to work together with that. So that being said, my question comes back to last week, which using the credit again, okay? Using your credit and so forth.
Right.
I don't know why. I don't know if it says use my credit in my forehead, but it's like the third person that calls me this week and says, hey, I want to see if I can use your credit. I know you're PML, and I heard, I guess through the grapevine, I heard that I got good credit. So again, I know you said that your personal opinion is not to use your own credit. Let me give you an example. I want to do another project that I'm probably going to use my credit. It's going to be a personal project, probably about 6 to 8 months from now. Okay. I'm hesitant in using my credit now because I don't know if it's going to affect it in the long run. Now, if to use my credit, it's going to be for a DCR loan. What's your opinion on that?
So if you do a DSCR loan and you're a credit sponsor, then depending on the lender, it should not report to your credit.
Okay.
Now, without knowing the lender or how they're going to structure the closing package, I can't tell you
Right.
if it will or won't. But for example, if I know my client's coming in to do a DSCR loan and we don't want the loan to hit their credit, on the lending side, if we execute the closing package correctly, the documents are provided to the servicing company in a certain way, it doesn't report to credit. The PG, the personal guarantee, only shows up on credit if there's a default. And that applies across the board. Now,
Okay. All right.
in that instance, any loan application you complete in the future, you're technically not the borrower on the transaction. The LLC is, the entity is the one that borrowed the money. You're just personally guaranteeing the debt to that lender. So you do not have to include that piece of real estate on your real estate owned for projects in the future.
Okay.
But depending on the lender on that transaction, if they run a background check, they may find that property is associated with you. And then at that point, you would have to disclose it to whoever you're working with. So now to clear something up, it's not that I don't think you should use your credit, but if I'm going to be a credit sponsor for a transaction and my credit's the one that's being used and I'm the personal guarantee, I'm going to want a hell of a lot more than 10%. of a transaction. So I wouldn't do a deal like that. Now, as a credit sponsor, and you came to me and the terms were more favorable, then absolutely I would consider being a credit sponsor. But some of the deals that I've seen or some of the structures, there isn't enough meat on the bone, or it's not enticing enough for me to want to consider using my credit. But it all depends on who your borrowers are, who the of the group is, and your intent in terms of the transaction and how involved you plan on being.
Okay. Thanks for the info.
No problem.
Excellent. And definitely, we'll give you a call. I'll text you tomorrow, and then we'll schedule something.
Sweet. Looking forward to it.
All right, bub. Thanks. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, B.
All right. So if that's it, I'm going to jump off. And
Joel has a question.
Oh, go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, just quick question. When you mention first position and on the LLC, can you explain a little more on that? I have an idea, but I just want to hear it in other words, please.
So it's not necessarily first position in the LLC. It's what's called the preferred equity position in the LLC. So the LLC owns the real estate. The LLC is on title. The LLC is the owner of that property. The seller, instead of having a seller second mortgage, the seller has a preferred equity position in the LLC. And within the LLC documents, like the operating agreement, will dictate how they're going to get paid their equity position. And so if that equity position is $100,000 that they have preferred equity in the LLC, and they're owed 6% on their $100,000 of equity in the LLC, then they get paid that monthly until they don't. And then the operating agreements and entity documents dictate how the seller, in this case now the owner of the property via the LLC, can take over the property to protect their interest, their $100,000 equity in that property. So it's not a position within the LLC. It's considered it's not a first position in the LLC. It's considered a preferred equity position in the LLC.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Nicely put. Nicely put. Stephen, brother, time to wrap this up. Stephen, I can't thank you enough. I'm pretty sure we all agree, Julie, myself, we've talked about you over and over. You know, again, we have our fair share of discussions every time we get together at our meetups. We are going to see you on the 28th, right?
I'll be there.
Very good. And so, brother, again, wealth of knowledge. Can't thank you enough. Guys, his one pager is in the chat. Please grab it. Reach out to Stephen. The guy knows more than what he lets out to know. Humble as they come, and more than welcome to have that conversation one-on-one with you guys. Make sure that you guys do everything the right way the first time, so you guys don't end up being caught up in a hurricane that you don't want to be in the middle of, right? So thank you all for coming. Yeah, and I know it's early. I think early in the morning where you're at over in Vietnam. Sorry, you guys. Thank you for being here. I see Stephen Fumi is in Japan right now. I mean, buddy, you're global. You're global. You're like Mr. 305. You're global, nationally.
This is great.
Worldwide. So Stephen, thank you, brother.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys for having me, and I look forward to the next Dropping Jules.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Stephen. Everybody. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. We appreciate you all. See ya.
Hey, everybody.
Good
See
night.
ya.